All right, let's get right into it. We're going to talk about a story of just unbelievable courage set against the backdrop of a raging 19th century river. We're going to piece together the life and the final heroic act of a man named Frank Padgett, an enslaved hero whose story was very nearly erased from history altogether.
Wow, that sense right there, it just perfectly captures the life or death stakes we're talking about. This is about a man looking a flooded river right in the face, knowing without a doubt that one wrong move means he's not coming back. So who was this man, and what was the incredible choice he was about to make?
To really get it, we first have to understand his world. And we're not talking about just any scenic river. Back in the mid-1800s, the James River was basically Virginia's economic superhighway. It was the lifeblood, the main artery for all commerce moving from inside the state out to the big coastal ports.
And this right here, this was the vehicle that made it all happen, the Batteau. You can think of it as the 18-wheeler of its time. I mean, that flat-bottom design, it was genius. It let the boat just glide over shallow parts of the river. But that length made it incredibly tough to handle, especially when you hit dangerous rapids.
So who was steering these boats? Well, they were the Batteau man, the absolute masters of this river. You had to be incredibly strong, of course, but also unbelievably skilled. But here is the crucial, tragic irony of it all. While their work was literally the engine of Virginia's economy, the vast majority of these expert boatmen were enslaved. Their names, their stories, almost totally wiped from the record. It was a way of treating essential, highly skilled men as if they were disposable property.
Which brings us to one specific day, January 21st, 1854. There's a winter storm, and it's turned the James River from a highway into a churning, mud-brown monster. The conditions were absolutely lethal. And on this particular day, things went from bad to worse really fast. A canal boat called the Clinton is getting pulled upstream when its tow rope just snaps. And in that instant, it's no longer under control. It's just a helpless barge, thrown into the flood, swept out into the main channel, and then smashed over a dam, which just tore the boat to pieces. The wreck finally gets snagged on some rocks, leaving about 37 people, passengers and crew, stranded in the middle of a freezing, violent river, and the water is still rising. From the shore, all people could do was watch in absolute horror.
But just as panic is setting in on the riverbank, the whole story shifts. It turns from a story of disaster into one of almost unbelievable courage as a rescue mission starts to come together.
And the person who steps up to lead it? Frank Padgett. He was an enslaved man known as an old headman batteauman. Now that title meant he was a lead boatman and expert navigator of this exact treacherous piece of water. On that river, his skill gave him an authority that everyone, black and white, had to respect. So Padgett puts together a crew. And look who joined him. 3 enslaved men, Frank Padgett, Sam, and Bob, and 2 white employees from the canal company, William G. Matthews and William McColgan. In an era of rigid racial hierarchy, this crisis forged a team based not on social status, but on pure skill and raw courage. And what they managed to do, it was just staggering. This wasn't one single act. It was a series of grueling, death-defying trips back and forth into that freezing, violent water.
On their first big attempt, they're fighting the current, they're fighting a squall, but they actually managed to reach a rock, where the captain of the Clinton and a few others were trapped. They got them. They brought them all back to safety.
But they weren't done, not even close. They went back out, again and again and again, turning their little bateau into a rescue shuttle, pulling more than 30 men off the main part of the wreck and getting them to shore.
By this point, they've saved almost everyone. I mean, they're exhausted, they're freezing, but one man was still out there. His name might have been Edmund, and he was completely alone, trapped on a different rock, with a river just clawing up around him. And this right here is where you see the true measure of these men. They had already saved dozens of people. They were exhausted. The weather was getting worse. No one, and I mean no one, would have blamed them for stopping. But they didn't stop. In fact, 2 more men joined their crew, and they pushed their boat back out into the river one last time.
They made it to the rock. They got close enough for Edmund to leap into the Batteau. But in that exact split second, the river finally won. The rescue boat crashed into a rock hidden just below the surface, and it broke apart. In the chaos, Frank Padgett and the very man he came to save, Edmund, were swept away into the current, and they drowned.
So, after saving dozens of others, Padgett gave his own life to save one last stranger. His sacrifice was undeniable, but how do you remember a hero who, legally, was considered property? This is where the story teaches us its biggest lesson. A hero's legacy, especially for someone society tried to make invisible, is incredibly fragile.
But his story didn't just disappear. An eyewitness, a man by the name of Captain Edward Eccles, was so profoundly moved by Padgett's heroism that he paid for this monument out of his own pocket. It was an absolutely stunning tribute, an acknowledgement of a man's courage that crossed every social and racial line of that time.
For more than 100 years, this monument stood as proof of what Frank Padgett did. But, as time goes on, the memory it was built to protect became fragile. It became vulnerable to being forgotten, or even worse.
And that vulnerability became a shocking reality in 2012. The official state historical marker, the sign that told this very story, was stolen. It just vanished. As you can see from this letter, the community had to rally together, raise money, and coordinate just to replace the sign telling the story of their own local hero. A piece of their history was literally stolen from them.
The only reason we even know Frank Padgett's name today is because one person was moved enough to build a monument, and a modern community was dedicated enough to replace a stolen sign. History doesn't just sit there. It has to be actively protected. And it really leaves us with a pretty critical question. When a hero's story can be so easily taken down or stolen, what does it truly take to make sure that our history, especially the history of those so often overlooked, is not erased?